Previously on What Do You Know with Nick and Devin. What do you know about Bloody Sunday?
Does this have to do with the Irish conflict?
Yep. Really boil that one down. So, August of 1969, a major riot breaks out in Derry, which is called the Battle of the Bogside, which pushes Northern Ireland to ask the Crown for military support and is often seen as the start of the Troubles.
Okay.
So August 1969 is when the Troubles kind of begin, right? So violence continued to rise in Northern Ireland, and in response, the British Army introduced internment without trial in August of 1971. So an operation that involved the mass arrest and internment of people suspected of being involved with the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. They would just immediately be arrested and interned. No trial, no nothing. That was August 1971.
Love that.
Okay?
Perfect.
Sick. The parade route was to start from Bishop's Field and end at Guildhall Square in the city center where the rally would take place. So the march set off at about 2:45 p.m. with about 10 to 15,000 marchers, many joining along the route as it continued. Quote, "This Sunday became known as Bloody Sunday, and bloody it was. It was quite unnecessary. It strikes me that the army ran amok that day and shot without thinking what they were doing. They were shooting innocent people. These people may have had been taking part in a march that was banned, but that does not justify the troops coming in and firing live rounds indiscriminately. I would say without hesitation that it was sheer, unadulterated murder. It was murder."
Yeah, 100%.
Nice. And then the Troubles kept going.
Right.
But there's inquiries, there's murder charges, like there's kind of some details that, because right now it's very unresolved and you're just angry and pissed. And you're still going to kind of be, but there's more to it.
Okay.
The aftermath. So all eyewitnesses, including marchers, local residents, British and Irish journalists that were present maintained that soldiers fired into an unarmed crowd and or were aiming at people fleeing and those helping the wounded. The soldiers, of course, disagree, right? While reports from the British Army's version outline that paratroopers returned fire at gunmen and bomb throwers, no British soldiers were wounded by gunfire or bombs, nor were any bullets or nail bombs recovered to support their claims.
Okay.
So no one was hit during this fire back and forth. No sort of evidence that bombs were thrown or went off happened, like nothing. And they're like, no, but they were firing at us. And they're like, but where? Where's the evidence, you know? Oh, this is funny. You'll like this part. So Ministry of Defense drafted the report and Home Secretary Reginald Maudling repeated it in the House of Commons the immediate next day, right? So Ministry of Defense is like, all right, this is everything that happened from our account, right? And in the House of Commons, the Home Secretary was like, let me tell you all what our British account is of what happened.
Okay.
Bernadette Devlin, independent Irish Socialist Republican MP, so member of Parliament, for Mid-Ulster, which is where all this is kind of happening, slapped Maudling for his comments that day and was temporarily suspended from Parliament.
Wow.
Because she was there.
Right.
So Devlin witnessed the shootings firsthand, and although convention decreed that any MP witnessing an incident under discussion would be allowed to speak on it in Parliament, she was infuriated when the Speaker of the House of Commons, Susan Lloyd, repeatedly denied her the opportunity. So if there's something on the floor that's being discussed, anyone who's actually witnessed that can speak to it. Because they can say, I was there, I saw what happened, I'll tell you my account.
Yeah.
But then the Speaker of the House of Commons is like, you can't talk about it. We're not going to let you talk.
Wow.
And she was like, fuck you. And then Maudling gets up there and he's like, this is our report. And she's like,
no.
Across the face.
Yeah.
Amazing. Can't we just like, slap people still? How amazing would that
you
be?
You can slap people all you want. There's just consequences for your actions.
Suspended from Parliament.
Right.
So that was the very next day. That was like, I think Monday or Tuesday, that's what happened, right? So Wednesday, February 2nd, 1972, tens of thousands attended the funerals of 11 of the victims, with the Republic of Ireland declaring a national day of mourning and a general strike occurring, which was the largest in Europe since World War II relative to population.
Okay. Wow.
So memorial services were held in Catholic and Protestant churches and synagogues throughout the Republic of Ireland. Schools closed and public transportation stopped running for the day. After the services, large crowds began to besiege the chancery of the British Embassy in Merrion Square in Dublin. So they were like, now they're all gathering and kind of coming like aggressively onto the embassy, the British embassy, right?
Yeah.
So the embassy staff was evacuated. Those tens of thousands turned their attention and marched to the square, placing 13 symbolic coffins outside the entrance of the chancery. They burned the Union Jack while the building was attacked with stones and petrol bombs. The guards tried to push back the crowds, but were heavily outnumbered. There's like maybe 50 guards and tens of thousands of people, right? So eventually the embassy was burned down.
All right.
Makes sense. The incident led to the Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs to demand involvement from the UN Security Council and deploy a peacekeeping force to Northern Ireland. Don't think it ever happened. I actually didn't look into that further, but I don't think the UN ever deployed any sort of UN...
Peacekeepers?
Yeah, peacekeepers. Kieran Conway, head of the IRA's intelligence gathering department in the 1970s, stated that after the massacre, the IRA command in Dublin received about 200 applications from Southern Irish citizens to fight the British. What a recruiting tactic, I guess. Yeah. That's just truly insane. So February 22nd, 1972, so this is about, a few days later, a couple weeks later, the IRA attempts to retaliate for Bloody Sunday and detonates a car bomb at Aldershot military barracks headquarters on the 16th Parachute Brigade. The bombing kills 7 ancillary staff, which kind of sucks because it's like admin staff. It's not any soldiers per se, you know what I mean? But that happened. Then September 7th, 1972, one para again, led by Lieutenant Colonel Wilford, raided the headquarters of the Ulster Defence Association and houses in St. Kilda, Belfast. This is a loyalist group, and two Protestant civilians were killed and others wounded by the paratroopers.
How does this man still have a job?
Well, not only just wait, because more comes from him at the end of this page.
Great.
So the soldiers, of course, claimed they were returning fire at the loyalist gunmen. Mm-hmm. Why would people loyal to you that you're supposed to be like fighting alongside with or protecting, why would they be firing on you?
Right.
Unless you did something to agitate that.
Right.
So the UDA organized angry demonstrations and declared, quote, "Never has Ulster witnessed such licensed sadists and such blatant liars as the first paras. These gun-happy louse must be removed from the streets." That's from loyalists. That's from Protestants. Insane. And it's all one
makes
para.
Sense.
It's all Lieutenant Colonel Wilford, right? So the Ulster Defence Regiment, a unit of the British Army, refused to carry out duties until one para was withdrawn from Shankill. They're like, no, fuck you guys. We're out, right? So at the end of, this is where you're going to be pissed. At the end of 1972, Lieutenant Colonel Wilford, directly in charge of the paratroopers involved in Bloody Sunday and Shankill, is appointed an officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. So that award, that namesake, is the British Order of Chivalry, rewarding contributions to the arts and sciences, work with charitable and welfare organizations, and public service outside the civil service. So there's levels to it, but this is part of like knighthoods and like dames, and was awarded that at the end of 1972.
Holy shit!
Right? Great job killing all those Irish.
But like, I don't know if I was a British person and I was to be awarded this title or whatever, this award later on, I'd be like, no.
Yeah.
Like, as a protest, I don't want the same title as this motherfucker who ordered the deaths of 14 plus people.
Right.
Like, are you kidding me?
Horseshit.
He gets fucking Nobel Prize. Jesus Christ.
When I was reading this, I was like, are you? And at first I was like, okay. I was like, let me look into this kind of this kind of award. Like, maybe it's not as big as I think it is. And then I'm like, oh, this is like
it's huge.
Knighthoods.
Right.
Got it. Heard. So yeah, I knew you were going to be nice and agitated about that.
Yeah.
Let's continue to get you mad.
Let's continue.
So we're going to get into the Widgery inquiry. So 2 days after the massacre, the British Parliament adopted a resolution for a tribunal into the shootings. So now they're like, we have your account, we get it, but let's look further into this and see what's going on. Some good intention within that, but also
Let's do our judicial
Correct.
diligence.
Exactly. So Prime Minister Edward Heath commissions Lord Chief Justice Lord Widgery to undertake it. Many witnesses wanted to boycott the tribunal due to lack of faith in the impartiality of Lord Widgery, but were eventually persuaded to take part. So many witnesses were like, I don't want to say anything because he can't be impartial. And then eventually like, no, like say something. So they do, right? So the report was completed within 10 weeks, which is super fast for an entire inquiry, and published within the 11th week, which is about mid-April 1972. So it's still relatively fresh. You know what I mean? Like this did only happen 10 weeks ago. Like everyone's still kind of mourning all of that. And so it supported this, of course, it supported the soldiers' accounts of the events on the day.
Of course.
Of course. So, quote, none of the deceased or wounded is proven to have been shot whilst handling a firearm or bomb. Some are woefully acquitted of complicity in such action. But there is a strong suspicion that some others had been firing weapons or hurtling bombs, end quote. So basically they're like, sure, no one that was shot was like had a firearm or a bomb on them, but others around them were shooting and firing, and so it just kind of happened.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Were any of the British soldiers wounded?
No.
Aside from maybe a bruise or two from a rock hitting them?
No. That was the big thing, is that like they said all these guns and all these bombs went off and they were under attack. First of all, none of them were wounded. No bullets other than like British bullets were found. No destruction or evidence of bombs being deployed were found. Like all of these things.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. So during the investigation, the tribunal used paraffin tests to identify lead residues from firing weapons. So they're like, well, maybe we can get like super scientific and show there was lead on people, right? From firing things, like whatever it might be, right? So 11 of those killed had no traces of lead on their clothes. One victim's clothes had already been washed, and the remaining had trace amounts that could have come from contact with soldiers as they had moved the bodies. So it wasn't enough to be like, oh,
they were
you
firing guns,
multiple rounds. It was more so by contact.
Yeah.
This also supported the nail bombs were found in the pockets of Jerry Donaghy. So the report concluded there were nail bombs in his pockets, which we know is bullshit. So Widgery concluded that the march organizers were responsible, stating, quote, there would have been no deaths if those who organized the illegal march had not thereby created a highly dangerous situation, end quote. He also stated that there was no evidence that paratroopers were intentionally set to, quote, flush out any IRA members or those who opposed the British Army. So he's like, this wasn't like a strategy. Like this wasn't premeditated, right?
Okay.
Right. So most witnesses disputed the report, of course, and considered it a whitewash, creating the slogan, Widgery washes whiter, which was a play on the Daz Soap Power ad.
Okay.
And painted on dairy walls across the city.
Yeah.
So that's the first inquiry, okay, where now you've, once again, angered the entire Irish nationalist population because you're like, what fucking bullshit is that report?
Right.
We helped you and gave you all these witness reports, and you just basically said, I get it, but they still were in the right.
Exactly.
Right. So August 1979 is the Warren Point ambush. So the Provisional IRA killed 18 soldiers and wounded 20 more in an attack on a British convoy and subsequently their reinforcements, utilizing bombs and firing from safety of the wooded areas. Many of the soldiers were paratroopers. So while that happened, on the same day, the assassination of Lord Mountbatten happened, where a bomb was placed by the Provisional IRA on his boat in County Sligo. Both events were claimed by the IRA and portrayed as belated retaliation for Bloody Sunday, with the graffiti statement, quote, 13 gone and not forgotten, we got 18 and Mountbatten. So that was their slogan for Bloody Sunday.
Okay.
Had you heard of that before? It sounded like relatively familiar.
Yeah, I think in my general knowledge of the whole conflict that might have come up, but it does sound familiar.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I was like, this is like, maybe it's just kind of the cadence of it, but it also just sounded like that was pretty like a popularized statement.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So all of this was happening. The Troubles proceeded on, right? Through the 70s, through the 80s, all of that, right? By 1998, with the latter stages of the Northern Ireland peace process underway, so now we're in 98, All of this is like getting underway. Things are calming down. Tony Blair agrees to hold a public inquiry into Bloody Sunday. So they're like, all right, we get it. The Widgery inquiry was bullshit. Like, let's actually do the work and let's get into what happened, right? And this kind of is the final say on Bloody Sunday. April 1998, Lord Saville is chaired to lead the inquiry along with judges John Toohey and William Hoyt. Utilized the Guildhall in Derry to hear testimony from March 2000 to November 2004. A thorough job was conducted with interviews including local residents, soldiers, journalists, politicians, and the review of large amounts of photographs and footage. So they went through everything. They interviewed everyone, no matter what. And so many wanted to comment on the Widgery report from Saville as the inquiry continued. Because they're like, can you just like say that this was bullshit?
Right.
Because they recognized that the current work was much more involved. But Saville declined to comment and only made a point that it was a judicial tribunal into Bloody Sunday, not the Widgery tribunal. He's like, that guy's not on trial. Like, I'm not going after his report. I'm just trying to find out what happened on Bloody Sunday.
We're only talking about Bloody Sunday, not the bullshit trial.
Right. He's like, I'm trying to be neutral. Yeah. I'm not trying to, like, get some other political bullshit involved.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. All right.
So, Lieutenant Colonel Wilford expressed... He's back, baby, with his medal. Lieutenant Colonel Wilford expressed anger at the decision to hold an inquiry and even doubled down on his actions by declaring he was proud of what he did on Bloody Sunday. Quote, there might have been things wrong in the sense that some innocent people who were not carrying a weapon were wounded or even killed, but that was not done as a deliberate malicious act. It was done as an act of war. End quote. He's like, people might have gotten killed, but such as war.
Wow.
I was like, bro, you doubled down?
Yeah.
You didn't have to say shit.
No, he could have just...
But it's one of those things where I feel like he like got back into a corner with this new inquiry, and he's like, fuck, I don't have someone on my side.
Right.
Because now it's 30 years later, you know what I mean? And so he's like, oh shit, like I'm going to get found out.
Okay.
So then he doubles down.
Yeah.
Like, don't say anything.
Right. He could have, I don't know. I feel like he could have been like 30 years later, like, you know what? I fucked up.
Right.
Sorry. But no, he was like, I did the right thing.
Right. And you're like, okay, you son of a gun. So during the investigation, one former paratrooper testified that the night before the march, a lieutenant told them, quote, let's teach these buggers a lesson. We want some kills tomorrow. End quote. But again,
who said that?
A former paratrooper testified that the night before the march, a lieutenant told them that.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Which again, remember, it wasn't premeditated.
Right.
Nothing was, this all just happened. So he also stated that he did not see anyone with a weapon nor hear any explosions, and that some of his fellow soldiers were thrilled and were shooting out of either bravado or frustration. Further testimony shows that the paratroopers knew that several soldiers also fired their own supply of dum-dums. Dum-dums, if you don't know, are the colloquial term for expanding bullets that were designed to expand upon impact for maximum effect. So they have their regulation
just, like,
ammo.
Suckers out to people.
So innocent.
Oh, God.
So in the middle of them charging, they're like, I'm not going to use my regulation bullets. I'm going to put in my own personal supply of a maximum impact bullet. Yeah. Right. But it wasn't premeditated.
Right. Of course.
Remember? It wasn't premeditated. So lastly, he states that his original statement in the Widgery inquiry was torn up and replaced with one that was not even close to the facts of the day. So he was like, yo, back in the day, I said what I'm saying now. But they tore that shit up and they were like, replaced.
Okay.
So the Ministry of Defense was accused of impeding the Saville inquiry with over 1,000 Army photographs and video footage never made available. They also stated that they lost the guns used by the soldiers on the day. Then they said they destroyed all the guns. Then they found some of the guns in various locations like Sierra Leone and Beirut. So they're like, we don't know where they are. Oh, actually, we burned them. Oh, actually, we found some. And it's like, here. Bro, come on.
Right.
Come on. So as the report was being written for publication, the inquiry had interviewed 900 witnesses over the course of 7 years and was the biggest investigation in British legal history. The longest and most expensive, totaling at £195 million over 12 years. It was completed by late 2009, but officially published after the general election in 2010. So they're like, we're done with it. And they're like, let's wait until after this election, just in case. Yeah.
Sure.
So this is what the report said. It concluded, quote, the firing of soldiers of one para on Bloody Sunday caused the deaths of 13 people and injury to a similar number, none of whom was posing a threat of causing death or serious injury, end quote. Furthermore, British paratroopers, quote, lost control when shooting into fleeing civilians and those who tried to help the wounded. Also, civilians had not been warned at any time by soldiers that they intended to shoot. So there was no warning before any of that happened.
Right.
All victims were unarmed and no nail bombs or petrol bombs were thrown by civilians. It stated that while some soldiers probably did fire out of fear and recklessness, others fired at civilians they boldly knew were unarmed. Soldiers concocted lies in an attempt to hide their acts. In example, Soldier H, the paratrooper who fired the most bullets, claimed to have fired 19 shots at a gunman behind a frosted glass window, missing his target with each shot, and that all of the bullets had gone through the same hole. He was like, no, you don't understand. I kept on shooting through the exact same hole, but I kept on missing the target.
That's one hell of a marksman. Jesus.
Correct.
Are you
but again,
kidding me?
he was just shooting to like defend himself.
Yeah, right. But he missed his target, but kept on shooting the same hole.
Right. 19 shots. So on the other hand, so that was, they condemned everything by the soldiers, right? However, on the other hand, the inquiry did conclude that an official IRA sniper was positioned in a block of apartments on William Street and fired one round at soldiers across the street, but hit a drain pipe. So no soldier was hit, but one round was shot by a sniper.
Right.
So the shot was fired after British soldiers had shot Damien Donaghy and John Johnston. The IRA tried to say that they only ran into place and quickly fired in retaliation to the initial shots, but the report concluded the snipers and other IRA members were already in position and fired because the opportunity presented itself. So they're like, no, we just ran and like retaliated because they started shooting, and they're like, bullshit. Like, you guys were in place. Yeah. Like, you didn't start shooting, you didn't start the thing, but like you saw the opportunity and you took it, right? So I do want to, say the other side of the report as well. Other IRA member fired a handgun at the British from behind a wall near the Rossville Flats, but no evidence shows that the soldiers even noticed the firing. He was just like, hey, and they're like, okay.
Well, they were already shooting so many other bullets. Why would one more make a difference?
Well, they were so focused on that one hole, remember?
Right.
Yeah. So he fired 3 rounds in anger after seeing civilians shot and killed. Father Edward Daly and others near the member shouted at him to stop, and he stopped. I mean, only 3. So in total, the IRA and like the civilians shot off 4 rounds.
4 bullets, yeah.
That's it. So Martin McGuinness, a senior member and later the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland, may have been armed with a Thompson submachine gun. May have been. However, there was insufficient evidence to conclude whether he fired it. Quote, we are sure that he did not engage in any activity that provided any of the soldiers with any justification for opening fire, end quote. So they were like, he might have had it on him. He didn't use it.
Right.
And nothing should have started. Okay? The soldiers' conclusions. So this is what they kind of decided about the soldiers, like who's responsible, who's not.
Sure.
Okay? Lieutenant Colonel Derek Wilford, your favorite guy, commander of one para and was directly responsible for the arrest operations, found to have deliberately disobeyed his superior brigadier, McLean, by sending soldiers into the bogside. So they're like, he's 100% responsible.
Great. Got it.
So Major Ted Loden, commander in charge of the support company, remember he's just under Lieutenant Wilford, cleared of misconduct. They said, quote, Loden neither realized nor should have realized that his soldiers were or might have been firing at people who were not posing a threat. So could not have been held responsible for claims by soldiers on the day that they received fire from snipers. So he's on the ground trying to organize his troops. People are firing at us. He's like, okay, well, go. You know what I mean? Like, he's enacting. And if I'm my lieutenant colonel, is like, yeah, fucking do it. Right. Then, of course. Right. You know what I mean?
He's doing what he was trained to do and follow orders.
Correct. But he's not responsible for the soldiers lying to him or Derek Wilford completely ignoring his orders. Right? So Captain Mike Jackson, he was an adjutant which is like an admin of one para. He actually created a list of the actions called Loden List of Engagements, which is like a brief account of soldiers and reasons why they fired, which seems a little like malicious in a way of being like, oh, who'd you kill? But it was more so just like to get accounts.
Yeah, well, I know, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that with like, at least in our military and like even police forces, like you have to take account for almost every bullet you fire, especially for the police, or at least you should.
Thank you for that caveat.
And especially in like the military, you are trying to keep track of like casualties, who you're shooting at, and just trying to keep track of your bullets and like who you're killing, just for like record keeping, and like making sure that like what you're doing is making sense for your operation
and it's justified.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's like where because I think people saw and heard of the list and were like, what are they like reveling in like what they did, right? By like now like recording all of this. But it was found like no names were used in the list, and it was not an investigative document, but a record, to your point, records of shots fired. Right. And so not ideal to have created, but was not malicious or sinister in administration of.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because like in a military operation, like you're not going to count every time you pull the trigger, but you can count how many mags you have lying next to you at the end of the day.
Right. So that's kind of what this was. Yeah. So Major General Robert Ford, remember, he's kind of the one that set all of this Operation Forecast into motion. He was cleared of any fault, but it was noted that his choice of one para, and in particular Lieutenant Colonel Wilford, to lead the arrest of any rioters was found to be disconcerting.
Okay.
Quote, one para was a force with a reputation for using excessive physical violence, which thus ran the risk of exacerbating the tensions between the army and the nationalists, end quote. So they're like, all right, you didn't know that any of this was going to happen.
Yeah.
You weren't even there. You didn't like do anything beyond set all of this into motion, but you should have known not to send one para.
Right.
Brigadier Pat McClellan was cleared of any wrongdoing. He gave appropriate orders to arrest any rioters and immediately return to base, but he cannot be held accountable for Wilford's disobedience. Right? Again, makes sense. Couple more. The last couple people: Major Michael Steele, in charge of passing the orders between McClellan and the ground troops, and he was cleared of any wrongdoing because he was just delivering orders. Right? Intelligence officers Colonel Maurice Tugwell and Colin Wallace, Army press officer, cleared of any wrongdoing for the information they released to the media was not a deliberate attempt to deceive the public, but was simply due to inaccurate information they received. Right? So they're going to the media and they're like, this is what happened. The army was being fired on, like all of this stuff, but they're only relaying the information that they got. Right? They're not an investigative force.
Right.
Like they're just receiving the information and giving it to the press. And here's the last guy. So Lance Corporal, known as only, quote, Soldier F.
Okay.
Now, he was found responsible for 5 of the 13 killings on Bloody Sunday.
Holy shit.
He's currently identified. It's just because they're back in court, legally, I don't want to say the name.
Fair.
I have it. And
don't say it.
Right. Well, because because the case is now back in court, he's under anonymity. However, there was, and we'll talk about it in a second, but there was a break in the court case. And so during that break, they released the name, but then he went back into anonymity. So then everything was pulled.
Right.
So, yeah. So we're only going to refer to him as Soldier F.
Let's keep it that way.
Correct.
Yeah.
It rhymes with, no, just kidding. So
it sounds like Schwan Schwimmy.
Yeah, exactly. So we're in our last couple of things here. So British Prime Minister David Cameron says, quote, this is his, after the conclusion of the inquiry, this is kind of his speech to the House of Commons.
Okay.
And he says, quote,
This is Soldier F?
No, I'm so sorry. This is Prime Minister David Cameron.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now he's reporting, let me go back for a second. So everything I talked about with the soldiers, that was what the report concluded about each of them. Either making it a note, telling them they were responsible, clearing them of misconduct, whatever it was. Right?
Okay.
So now within the report, this is the Prime Minister at the time speaking on the report and speaking on the incident.
Okay. Yeah.
So again, David Cameron says, quote, "Mr. Speaker, I'm deeply patriotic. I never want to believe anything bad about our country. I never want to call into question the behavior of our soldiers and our army, who I believe to be the finest in the world. And I have seen for myself
That's fucking stupid. Why wouldn't you? Okay, anyway.
Again, they're very dramatic.
Extremely
in
patriotic.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to have fucking horse blinders on anything that happens. That's fucking moronic for anyone in any country. Anyway, go on. What is?
But he's the prime minister.
He's the prime minister. All right. So what does Davey say?
Davey, okay.
Davey.
He's really close.
Yeah.
And so he says, quote, "And I have seen for myself the very difficult and dangerous circumstances in which we ask our soldiers to serve. But the conclusions of this report are absolutely clear. There is no doubt. There is nothing equivocal. There are no ambiguities. What happened on Bloody Sunday was both unjustified and unjustifiable. It was wrong. You do not defend the British Army by defending the indefensible." So Cameron acknowledged that all victims were unarmed. End quote. Cameron acknowledged that all victims were unarmed.
He just starts talking about himself in the third person.
Oh, that Cameron. When they had been shot and killed and the British soldiers had fired the first shots at civilians, Cameron, while noting that he is not trying to justify in any way, stated that it was not a premeditated action, but apologized on behalf of the British government. A survey in June of 2010 found that 61% of Britons and 70% of Northern Irish agreed with the apology. All right, we'll take it. So this is the last thing, but this is like kind of like the justice now that closes it out. Okay. Murder charges.
Okay.
So after the publication of the Seville report, a murder investigation began by the Police Service of Northern Ireland's Legacy Investigation Branch. November of 2015, a former member of the Parachute Regiment was arrested for questioning over the deaths of William Nash, Michael McDade, and John Young.
Okay.
He was released on bail shortly after. So that was one that kind of went out. Public Prosecution Service for Northern Ireland, however, announced in March 2019 that there was enough evidence to prosecute Soldier F for the murder of James Ray and William McKinney. Both were shot in the back while fleeing. He was also charged with 4 counts of attempted murder. The Seville inquiry did not report that based on evidence, Soldier F had the Seville report did report that based on evidence, Soldier F had also killed Michael Kelly, Patrick Doherty, and Barney McGeehan. However, the evidence from the inquiry was found inadmissible due to the only support to the evidence. The initial evidence was Soldier F's co-accused Soldier G, but he was deceased at the time of the charges. So like the only way that this is substantial is if we have Soldier G's account, but he's dead. Yeah. So September 2020, after outcry from victims' families that only one soldier would face trial for the killings, it was ruled that there would be no charges against any other soldiers. They're like, okay, you can charge him, but you can't charge anyone else. Because remember, when we went through everyone, I think it gets too ambiguous to play into court, and I think they also were like, we're gonna give you kind of this like symbolic sacrifice, but no one else can be charged.
Bullshit.
Totally. It's absolutely bullshit. But that's kind of what happened.
All right.
So July 2021, the Public Prosecution Service decided it would no longer prosecute Soldier F due to statements from 1972 that were deemed inadmissible as evidence, which is like horseshit. They're like, sorry, we just don't have enough evidence to prosecute. And everyone's like, what the fuck?
You have, okay.
Right. So March 2022, the High Court overturns the decision not to press charges against Soldier F after William McKinney's family appealed. The decision ordered that the Public Prosecution Service to reconsider the case. I'm just going to say PPS. The PPS did not like this and appealed the overturn to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. So the top thing, right? But the court refused their permission to appeal, and the PPS was forced to continue the prosecution. They're like, no, bullshit. Like, bullshit.
Yeah.
You are going to try this case.
Right.
Which, on one hand, thank you. On the other hand, now you have an office that doesn't want to try a case being forced to try a case.
Right.
So that gives me a little, like, hesitation and, like, frustration and worry.
How will it turn out? Right.
Correct. And, like, how much are you really putting into this? Right?
Yeah. It's wild, too, that, like, the families are still dealing with this for 60 years later.
Right.
Minus a couple years.
Give or take.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was with the Seville report, everyone was like, oh shit. Like, finally we have something that says exactly what we already knew. Right. And all of these things, and it's finally out there, and it's being acknowledged, and we got an apology. And then they were like, well, now that we've pinned a specific soldier to these people, let's go after it. Right.
Yeah,
it just sucks that it took so long for that to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last couple things, and it's relatively new, obviously. January 2023, the case against Soldier F resumes. August 2023, Judge Ted McGill ruled the 5 statements given to the Widgery inquiry implicating Soldier F could be used as evidence in trial. And as of December 2023, an evidentiary hearing was held, and Judge McGill ruled that Soldier F should face trial at Belfast Crown Court. No trial date has been set. But that was a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
So that is the entire tale of Bloody Sunday. From the lead up to the event to the fallout to now we're finally kind of getting some resolution in today. And again, like, there's so much more within the Troubles after this fact, especially in the 80s and the 90s.
Right,
You know what I mean? And then, of course, leading up to it, hundreds of years of this conflict between British and Irish and Protestants and Catholics and all of those things. So there's so much more involved, but I felt like I couldn't give a proper context without giving you everything. And I feel like it's really sad and it's really frustrating and it's really like angering, but things are kind of settling out.
Did I completely miss what happened to the
Lieutenant Colonel Wilford?
Yeah.
He was found guilty of basically the entire operation.
Oh, good.
He didn't. The issue though is that like he didn't kill anyone. He was just guilty of enacting the whole operation and disobeying orders and misconduct.
Okay, so he got like a slap on the wrist in the military world.
Sure.
All right.
And so, unfortunately, they can't charge him with any murder.
Right.
But they can say misconduct and all these things. So I do wonder, which I didn't look into, I do wonder if they stripped him of anything. Because now after the report comes out,
reward,
I mean, I'm sure they didn't, but unfortunately, but yeah, I mean, again, you have 14 people dying from a day that it was unnecessary, reckless, like all the things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for telling us.
Yeah. And like, of course, there's so much like art and Sunday Bloody Sunday, and there's so many ways to commemorate the day, but it was kind of, I mean, we talked about the initial riot that started the Troubles, but I think this was just kind of the big thing that set everything into motion.
The entire discography of the Zombies.
Right.
Or the Cranberries, excuse me.
Yeah. Singing Zombie.
Yeah.
I actually watched that the other day, them performing Zombie live. And she was like, I actually started it on acoustic. And she's like, I just got kind of the chorus in my head, and then we wrote it from there. But then she's like, I was in the studio, and I grabbed an electric guitar, and she was like, that was the most intense song we've ever written. Because everything else was so light. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, when you listen to Zombie with the context of the Troubles and all this stuff, it's like, oh shit. It's not just a fun jam song. This is a song.
Well, because in the video she's performing it live and everyone's like, yeah, and then you're just like, do you get it?
Right.
But yeah, so this is definitely a more memorialized throughout history and through different cultural aspects, and now we see what happens with Soldier F.
Yeah,
I'll keep y'all updated. The story continues.
Cheesy Pete's.
All right. Well, thank you, Devin, for sticking around.
Yeah, thank you for telling me. I guess this is like, we're even now. I did Wounded Knee. You did Bloody Sunday.
Exactly. We are now officially even. But everyone, thank you for sticking around. And make sure to follow us on WDYK_podcast on all social media. And hopefully we'll have a quick resolution to this. Thank you for subscribing, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah. See you next. I'm going to go stare in a corner for a while. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.